So welcome to cybersecurity training. This is part of the Small Business Cybersecurity Resilience in Maryland. That's quite a mouthful. We just call it SCRIM program. Some of you folks on here were participants in that program. Some of you may have applied, but unfortunately were not able to be invited into that program as there were limited funds and a limited number of people. However, just a little aside here, I do hear from the state that they are looking to do something similar in the future. So if you didn't get through in the first round, keep your eye out and maybe you can get in on the next time around. The training and the training itself today is also sponsored by the SBDC, that's the Small Business Development Center. And we are under the Small Business Development Center of Maryland. So welcome everybody. Just for your information, everybody is on mute. If you do have a question anytime during this proceeding, please put it into the chat and we'll try to address some questions as long as they're of a general nature. We don't want to, not going to be answering people's specific questions, specific to their IT infrastructure in this open forum. But be aware also that we are being recorded, and this will be played back on the Braxton-Grant website, and also will be offered up through the SBDC website. Before I go any further, allow me to introduce myself. I am Peter Cushley. I am a director here at Braxton-Grant Technologies and have been involved with the SCRIM program as well as the DCAP program through the state, which is another defense cyber initiative. And we were fortunately asked by the SBDC to take the lead in this training, and we're happy to do it. But I should tell everybody that the material that you're going to hear today should not be construed as advice or as direct guidance from the Maryland Department of Commerce or the University of Maryland. This is information based on recognized best practices, and it's up to you, the individual company, as to whether or not you want to adopt the practice. I'm just taking 1 second. I had a couple other people jump in, just accepting them. Okay. So what are our objectives today? Well, we want to do a kind of high-level overview of cybersecurity and what it means, particularly for small businesses. Cybersecurity, as you all know, is really prominent in the news today. We hear about breaches and cyber threats all the time. But why is it essential? Cybersecurity is essential to protect your digital assets, which includes, sensitive personal and financial information, your company's intellectual property, and your critical infrastructure, your IT infrastructure, whether you've got bricks and mortar and an on-site LAN, or whether you are a small company that maybe just has 2 or 3 people working remotely. Cybersecurity is meant to protect that because attacks can have serious consequences, including financial loss, damage to reputation of your company, which will lead to further financial loss, and even physical harm to possibly you or your company's employees. Other benefits of practicing cybersecurity are that it could reduce your insurance premium if you are doing cybersecurity training and taking measures to strengthen your cybersecurity posture. I can't guarantee that. I'm not an underwriter, but generally, when the underwriters offering you a policy are looking into giving you a policy, they will ask you a series of questions, and the more you are doing to protect yourself and protect your environment, the better it'll stand for you in terms of the premiums that you get offered. Seen that in practice, but again, not a guarantee for you. And also, other benefits are if your customers know that you are practicing sound cybersecurity practices, it's going to give them confidence in working with you because you are probably working with some of the data that they want protected, right? Their financial information and maybe some personal information and certainly intellectual capital that they may have. And lastly, if you are working towards compliance with any government initiatives. If you're a small business, it's going to be doing business with the DoD or even other agencies within the government. You may have to be compliant with NIST 800-171 or perhaps CMMC. You may have heard that when that comes out. That's still in the rulemaking process. But good cybersecurity initiatives and a lot of what you're going to hear today go a long way towards getting you compliant with those particular things that you may have to adhere to in order to do business with the government. Very quickly, here's the content we're going to do today, talking a little bit about the threats, cybersecurity practices, some topics about protecting your data, recognizing and responding to certain threats, cybersecurity policies and training, and then we'll kind of conclude up. And if we've got some time, I'll see if we can handle a couple of questions in the chat. So what are types of cyber threats that are out there? This is going to be familiar to a lot of you because these are the things we see and hear about in the news every day. In fact, some of us may have even been victims of some of these things. Um, different types of cyber threats include malware. That's viruses, the ransomware, spyware. Ransomware we often hear about. Those are often the threats that make the news um, when it's a large company and the company is being held literally for ransom. The threat actors will infiltrate their environment and lock up their environment and deny services of that company to their own data until that company pays a ransom. Don't see that quite as much with small businesses, but it still can happen with small businesses. And certainly viruses can affect everybody. And those are sometimes done just, by individuals that are just being nefarious and causing harm just to see if they can. Another type of cyber threat is social engineering. Social engineering is where threat actors use psychological means to lull you into think that you are working with somebody who is trusted and that you're safe, but you're not. And it's called social engineering because they're generally using personal info that they've gleaned from, say, Facebook or or Twitter, some other social aspect to get information about you, and then they'll contact you and using that little bit of information, lull you into thinking that this is somebody that this is somebody that you should trust. So you need to be careful with social engineering type of attacks. One of the main types of social engineering attacks is phishing attacks, and phishing attacks are the kind of attacks that happen probably most commonly with small companies as well. And what happens with phishing attacks is you will get an email and it'll look like a legitimate email, look like it actually is coming from where they say it's coming from, but it's actually not. And there's a link on there, and if you click that link, that's when the trouble starts. That's where they'll, perhaps load a virus onto your machine, perhaps deny your service, put you into a ransomware situation. So with phishing attacks, and we'll talk a little bit more about them as we go on how to recognize when a threat is a phishing attack as opposed to something real. With insider threats, this is a situation where somebody within your company, a trusted individual, carries out a cyber attack on you. And we've seen the big ones with basically spies, really, where insiders have stolen government information, sold it to other state nations, and they've gone overseas to get away from prosecution. But insider threats can happen even in small companies, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that later. When you've got people leaving the company, that is a time when insider threats often pop up with small companies. So in the real world, how often does this happen? Well, here's some kind of startling statistics. 48% of small and medium-sized businesses globally, that's almost half, have experienced a cybersecurity incident in the past year. 25% say that they have experienced more than one incident in the past year. And here in the US, 73%, almost three-quarters of United States small business owners reported a cyber attack last year. Now, of course, that could be something as benign as a phishing attack that got caught, but still that is an attack. So it's very prevalent out there. Let's talk a little bit about some of the cybersecurity practices that you can follow. And please, before I move going further, this will be posted on our website and on the small business website. If you want, you can make this slideshow, this recording, part of the cybersecurity training awareness program that you should do with your own company, with your own employees. It's amazing how much trouble can be avoided by just making people aware of some of the very simple edicts with cybersecurity practices, starting with password management. Passwords are been around forever. We're all very familiar with them. And you've probably heard horror stories of people, doing things that, honestly, if you've got any awareness of this, some of the things people do, you just shake your head and you wonder, what in the heck were they thinking? I can remember years ago as a systems administrator, I'd go to somebody's desk, they were having a problem getting in, they locked themselves out, and literally I would lift up their keyboard and they had their password taped to the bottom of their keyboard. And I said, so I'd say, well, here's your right password, put it in. And then I'd stand there while they changed their password to something more secure and caution them never to do that again. But people do that. And you also hear stories about, people having a password that's like password 123 or let me in, those kinds of things. Not a good practice and leaves you wide open. What's more prevalent these days is the use of strong, unique passwords. Different companies will have different requirements for their passwords, but a kind of general rule of thumb is make it at least 12 characters long. 14 or more is better. Use uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and symbols. If that sounds familiar, that's because if you've recently logged on to some new site, you're using some new commercial site or vendor or whatever, and you've signed up to have access to it, that's generally the information they're telling you to put in your password. And if it doesn't have those things, you'll get a little error message saying not strong enough. So at a minimum, follow these types of things. And don't use words that are found in the dictionary or names. But if you do decide that you need something that you're going to remember better, a little word of advice is use a phrase. And in that phrase, maybe change up some of the letters for numbers, like make every E in the phrase a 3, that kind of thing. But in the real world, the best thing to do is use a password manager. And we're seeing more and more of this these days. Password managers, two of them that I've listed here are Keeper or LastPass. Again, we are not trying to sell any particular password manager to anybody. These are just two of the more common ones I'm naming. You can go out there and look if you need a password manager. These are apps that generate new random passwords for all the sites you visit, and then they store it in a secure virtual vault, and then you only need to remember the password that you have for the password manager. You get onto the password manager then gets you onto all of these different sites, and each of the sites would have a unique password. So if you need access to more than just a handful of sites, it's absolutely the way to go. You don't need to remember dozens of passwords. Email authentication. This is more of a technology process here. Some of the things we're going to talk about today are human-based, some of them are policy-based, some of them are technology-based. Infrastructures can vary widely, so I'm not going to get too deeply into anything technology-based. But suffice to say that email authentication, it's a technical solution which will allow your system to verify that email that's coming in is at least coming from a trusted domain. It can protocols like SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. They run transparent to you as the user, but if you've got them installed in your on your networks, um, you can have some measure of satisfaction and comfort that the email is at least being authenticated as coming from a relatively trusted domain. Yeah, next thing I'd like to talk about is multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is kind of becoming the norm, right? Although strong and unique passwords are necessary, the norm these days is to use not just the passwords, but something else, another factor to authenticate that you indeed do belong where you're trying to get. And I pose it that way because this is not just for your virtual assets that you're trying to get to, right? You could use multi-factor authentication for some of the physical assets you're trying to get to. For instance, if you've got a location, uh, again, some of you don't have bricks and mortar, some of you do, but if you've got a location and you require people to come to the front door and use a swipe card and then put in a password, that's multi-factor authentication. Same thing with uh, access to IT products or IT assets of any kind. You want to have more than one way for people to access. And the most common factors are something you know, something you have, something you are. It's a good way to remember this. The something you know would be a password or a memorized PIN. We've talked about those enough. Something you have, like your smartphone or a secure USB key, or the fobs that are often you see often people using to swipe their way into a building, or perhaps your company's ID card actually has a built-in chip that does that. And then the last part is something you are. That's where biometrics come into play, a fingerprint or facial recognition. And these days, you can kind of combine those with the something you have, right? Because your smartphone, which you'd need to have access to, is the likely place for you to have fingerprint identification or facial recognition. There's also something else we talk about called soft tokens, and um, soft tokens are when a company will send you information, send you a secure ID for that session. Uh, and that's often done through emails and through texts. You log on somewhere and then it sends a text or email to your phone, your account, right? Because they're identifiable to you. And then you use that in combination with your password to get in. The idea here is to just make it harder on the threat actor. You can think of your own house or your own car. You're trying to get into your house. If you've got just a lock on the doorknob, that's not super secure, but you add a deadbolt. Now you have two things that some bad guys got to get through to get into your house. Same with your car. You might have a combo lock on your car door, and that just gets you in the car. You can't do anything with the car unless you have the key as well. So multi-factor just makes it harder on the bad guys. Another sound cybersecurity practice is software updates and patching. Really, what you got to think about here is that even though you've got things in place, the bad guys are always trying to stay ahead of the defense, right? So you always want to make sure that any software that you're running that your IT department or your IT outsourcer has put in place for you on your laptops, on your servers, on your system anywhere, need to be regularly updated to fix any vulnerabilities and to shore up any holes that may have existed. A lot of companies often do a good job before they roll out their software in testing it. Sometimes they don't. We've seen that recently in the news. But they do quality testing, but there's really no comparison on in-house quality testing compared to rolling out a new software patch and all of a sudden 5 million people across the country are using it. That's when vulnerabilities do get found out, and that's why companies follow up their software upgrades with patches, because it's the in-use testing that really does point out the vulnerabilities that may have been missed by the developers and the quality assurance people. Secure Wi-Fi. We do a lot of work on Wi-Fi these days. Even some of you, I know, like here at our company, we are moving around our own building and we're on our own secure Wi-Fi. Um, not There's not as much hardwire anymore in a lot of places. And you smaller companies that are kind of very mobile and on the go, you're probably using Wi-Fi from home, or your folks might be using Wi-Fi from wherever they may be for that day, be it at a customer site, or perhaps they're just you know parking themselves in a Starbucks after dropping the kids off at school and going to work for a couple of hours right there. It's often on Wi-Fi. A couple of cautions with Wi-Fi. One, you should always use strong encryption on Wi-Fi, like WPA3. You'll see that when you go to sign up on a Wi-Fi network, it'll usually talk to you about the protocols. Avoid public Wi-Fi for sensitive transactions. Avoid it as much as you possibly can, to tell you the truth. Um, Attackers can exploit vulnerabilities in Wi-Fi networks and gain access to all those things that we talked about: the sensitive data, the financial data, the personal data, intellectual property, which means your information and your client's information could be at risk. And just a little caution for you: there's a thing called rogue Wi-Fi networks. Um, and that's something you should be very, very aware of if you are a person who likes to go to the coffee shop and log on. You'll think, like I used to. Oh, well, they gave me the network name and the password, so it's password protected. I know I'm good. What a rogue Wi-Fi network is, it could be the guy sitting in the corner on his laptop. He's actually sitting there, and what he's done is set up a rogue Wi-Fi network where the name might be off just slightly from the actual network you're trying to get on. Like, instead of logging on at the Big Bean coffee shop, he's set one up that says the Big Beaner, and he's using the same password as they have posted on the wall. So you think very quickly, you go in, you attach to Wi-Fi, you don't even realize that you attach to Big Beaner, not Big Bean. And now this person can see all your traffic and then route you out to the internet. So you're sitting there merrily thinking that you are on the internet, and you are, but you're going through that rogue Wi-Fi. So be very cautious when you are out in public on a Wi-Fi, that you are on the Wi-Fi that you think you are on. And a better practice would be, get your own hotspot and use a hotspot instead of the Wi-Fi. Secure remote access. This is one that's near and dear to many small businesses. Use of remote offices is on the rise. Um, More and more people are doing their work from home or from other sites, and rather than just a quick session over Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or something, they might be doing all of their work from home, from the Wi-Fi. And the best way to protect your data from attacks in this scenario is to make sure that you're using VPN, or more recently, there's been more of a move to ZTNA, which is Zero Trust Network Accessibility, I believe the A is, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so if you're trying to if you're letting people connect to corporate from outside, use the VPN, use the ZTNA. It'll look at things such as, where is this person trying to log on from, and you've got things set up on the back end. If it sees that this access point is coming in from Europe, and you're based here in Maryland, flags will go up, and things will be questioned, and you can avoid some trouble. All right. So, what do we do about protecting your data if you're taking care of all of these different practices that you're doing? Well, things can still happen, right? There's often sometimes things outside of your control. Um, you may not always be 100% protected from everything. So it's important to have regular backups. Why is it important to have regular backups? Because when, or if, let's just be hopeful and say, if something were to happen, um, if you've got a good backup, you can then recover your data from that slice in time that last backup was done, and not lose all that important data and intellectual capital um, due to something that may have been out of your control, like a hardware failure, a power failure, human error, natural disasters, flooding, fire, those types of things, right? Cyber threats only, I mean, cyber security only goes so far to protect against those types of things. So you want to run good backups in order to be able to recover, right? You there's a thing called COOP, continuity of operations. Um, you want to be able to get back up and running as quickly as possible and minimize the loss to your company. And this is important whether you're using local laptops and backing them locally, whether you've got a LAN or WAN at your place of business, or whether you're doing a lot of your work right off the cloud. Make sure your cloud provider is running backups as often as you need them. And I say it that way because different companies will need or see the need for backups at different times. If you're not running a lot of data, you might be able to deal with 2 or 3 days loss of information. Most companies back up at least daily. If there's enough data going across their network, sometimes they um, run it more refined than daily. Encryption. Okay, encryption will protect your data if your data is intercepted. Um, if your data is intercepted and it's encrypted, it's virtually useless to the person that has it because they'd need the keys to uncrypt it, and that's not impossible, but very, very hard and complicated. And the average bad guy's not gonna worry about it, not gonna try to deal with stuff that's encrypted. Um, you can encrypt at the file level, at the folder level. That's becoming more and more common these days. And certainly, if you've got laptops and people are mobile with your laptops, please, people, make sure you've got full disk encryption, right? Your laptop can easily be misplaced, stolen, and then it's good to know that if that full disk is encrypted, that person basically stole a paperwork. That none of that information on there is going to be of any use to them, and you can now use your backups to restore where you were. There's a couple of applications that do this quite well. Microsoft comes with BitLocker. We here at Braxton-Grant, we don't love the Microsoft BitLocker. There's others that are better out there. Another one that's out there is Sophos, and there are others. But if you've got laptops as part of your infrastructure, particularly if they go out the door, uh, and you're mobile with them, please full disk encryption. All right, access control. Access control is basically it's kind of an extension of you hear in the government the phrase need to know. Access control is basically limiting the access to sensitive information to only the people who need to see it. The fewer people that need to see it, the fewer people who should have access to it. Um, and then it's a process, really. It's kind of this is a good crossroad of technology and policy. You design the policies within your company as to who should see what, and then the technologies like Active Directory can help you with that. Here's this little diagram kind of explains role-based access control, right? Within your company, you have maybe the finance department, the HR department, the IT department. In some of you smaller companies, one person might be in 3 of those roles, or each of those roles is just one person. But regardless of how many people are in that role, your administrator can assign the users to the role, and then the role is where you define the authority level as to who who should see data or not. And then using the technology, you set up the permissions to authorize that access for the specific role. Hope that makes sense to everybody. And then physical security, as I mentioned earlier, right? The assets that you have to protect in cybersecurity are not just virtual; they're physical as well, and that includes your IT infrastructure, it includes your buildings, and it includes your most important asset, which is your people. So physical security is an integral part of cybersecurity. And that include, locks, cameras, alarms on your building, access within the building to different parts of the building. Maybe everybody in your company has the two-factor authentication to get in the front door, but not everybody in the company should have the uh, access to get into the server room, that type of thing. So you kind of combine some of the things that we've talked about already. You can combine them to provide good physical security, multi-factor authentication, and the role-based access control. As I mentioned earlier, I said we would talk a little bit more about phishing, because phishing is so prevalent. Uh, these are some of the common signs of phishing attempts you'll see. And once you know some of these things, it kind of becomes second nature to be looking for them. When you get emails in, if you see some of these things, these are red flags, should definitely make you wonder. Trust your instincts. If you don't like the way something looks, you're probably right, and there's probably something threatening with that email. So in all cases, if there's any doubt as to who it's from or whether it's legitimate, do not click on any links. Right? Have your IT department quarantine it, figure out if you have a problem or not. But these are the things you look at. Are there too many grammatical or spelling errors in there? Threat actors generally are in a rush. They're doing things. Um, they're doing things, on a grand scale. Throw out a large net and maybe you'll catch one or two fish. So they rush things. They put things out that are filled with errors. A professional company sending out a real email isn't going to do that. Did they get your name wrong, right? Or did they call you, my friend, my dear, hey buddy, and people don't talk to you like that professionally. It's an indication they don't actually know your name, and maybe your email address didn't really give them any clues to your name, which is fine. Did it come from a public domain? Um, Very often you'll get emails. They look really slick. You think, oh, wow, my bank's reaching out to me. And it's not hard for threat actors to go out there and grab graphics and everything off the bank's actual websites and everything and compose an email that looks like it actually came from the bank. But make it a practice when you have any doubts about something. First of all, look at the return address, look at the reply email. And if that reply is coming from a Gmail or a Yahoo or a Live, I'm sure, John Z at yahoo.com is not going to be the right reply address for somebody from a legitimate company. So, um, is it from somebody at that company that you never heard of, company that you've dealt with a lot? That's another thing to be a little cautious about. I mean, people do come and go, but verify it, right? It could be just somebody claiming to be they work for that company and they don't. Uh, and in general, if sounds too good to be true, it probably is, right? You didn't really inherit money from some prince in some faraway land who needs you to somehow somehow smooth out that transaction to get the money in the country, that kind of thing. If you won the lottery, it probably is not going to come via email notification. So cautions when either you're being told you've won money or you can get money, or if you're being asked for money. Not, I know a lot of this might sound like common sense to a lot of people, but um, it happens so often, and sometimes you can just let your guard down because something just looks real good and you didn't do those double checks. So just keep some of these things in mind, and you should be able to avoid phishing attempts, which when we go back to those stats we talked about at the very beginning, a lot of those stats are skewed because of phishing attacks, because phishing attacks are very easy for threat actors to carry out. So companies could be hit with phishing attacks easily a couple times a year to reach those stats that we saw. All right. An incident response plan. What is an incident response plan? Well, basically, it's a plan for what do you do if there is a data breach, there is a data leak, you do have a cyber attack, there is a security incident. What are you going to do? You should have a plan in place so that you and everybody in your company knows what to do. You've all maybe worked for a company that had evacuation plans, right? If something went wrong, you're all supposed to go outside and each department's supposed to meet in a certain spot in the parking lot or under a certain tree, that kind of thing. That's kind of a mini incident response plan. But it's those kinds of things you need to know, and your company needs to know. If there's a physical threat, where do people need to go? If there's an incident, who needs to be notified? And what needs to be done to further mitigate the damage, right? Do things need to be shut down to stop the spread of this attack? Those kinds of things. And as far as an incident response plan goes, in Maryland, some companies, basically, if they've got to do with infrastructure and utilities, some companies have to have an incident response plan in place by law. So, and part and parcel of the incident response plan is again like a COOP plan. It's necessary to help you get back up and running when things do go south. Along with an incident response plan, it's always a good idea to have cybersecurity policies in place. And I should mention here that for those of you that are looking down the road at compliance with NIST or compliance with CMMC, these policies that I've listed here are very important to passing an audit for compliance, because most of these acts that you need to be compliant with do require some sort of audit, whether it's a self-audit or an external audit, and they will be looking for these policies. And as you look through here with me, you'll see that a lot of these are things that we talked about, right? Malicious code protections, we talked about malware and those kinds of things. Identity and authentication, we talked about role-based access, things like that, all kind of fall into some of the things that we were talking about as good cybersecurity practices. There's encryption. One of the ones I do want to point out here is employee onboarding and employee offboarding. Employee onboarding, why is that an important policy? Well, very often companies just look to hire somebody who seems right for the job. And that's great. That you definitely want somebody who is right for the job. But in this day and age, and with the threat of insider threats, you want to think about vetting employees further than that. You want to vet that person's background, maybe do drug tests for them. Just vet them so that you're confident that this person is not very likely to ever pose an insider threat. And on the offboarding side of things, something I just learned very recently is that what a lot of companies started doing is when somebody gives their resignation, they have the IT department does a deep dive and monitors and takes a look at what has this person accessed in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Because generally, if somebody's leaving and they're going to be an insider threat and maybe take some intellectual capital with them, or whatever, there's usually a trail for that over the last couple of weeks. So that's part and parcel of offboarding. You might want to consider doing that. You also might want to consider, which a lot of companies do, even if it's an employee that's been faithful and has been a very good employee. Some companies just put in a policy that says when the person resigns, you just tell them thank you very much, and you make that their last day and cut off their access and everything then, so that they don't have the opportunity to do anything over the last week or two if they are a disgruntled employee. So it's actually getting to the point now where a 2 weeks notice isn't even kind of the norm like it used to be, because most companies don't let you work out those 2 weeks. So I said policies and training, this particular slide, and you'll be able to access these once we post them, probably by the end of next week, we will post them. There are resources out there for you to put together a training program for your company, for your employees, and it doesn't have to cost you much of anything. These sites uh, all have cybersecurity training that costs you nothing, and you could just put your employees, on a spreadsheet, tell them they need to do, 8 or 10 of these in the next 3 months or whatever, and have your HR person or your supervisors just track who did it and who didn't. And that is enough for cybersecurity uh, training in terms of compliance, right? You don't have to pay for training. It doesn't, you don't have to have electronic records and everything else. Just keep track of who did what. And like I said, there's a lot of it that's out there that's absolutely free. Other things to look at in terms of training and policies is vendor security, right? We've talked all about your company. Well, your company, and I talked about some of your customers, right? Your customers want to know that you're doing some cybersecurity to keep their data safe, and you have that right to know that from your vendors. So if you're working with vendors, um, try to get to know them. Ask them about their cybersecurity policies. Ask them if they've got any certifications. Are they compliant with any particular government policies or anything like that? And just monitor their cyber performance. Keep an ear out, and make sure that the people that you're working with aren't in the news for any cybersecurity problems, because your data is important when it's them that are handling it. And then cybersecurity insurance, I talked about that earlier on. And as I mentioned back then, your premiums can often be affected by the measures that you have in place. The more cybersecurity practices that you follow, the happier your underwriter will be, and the more likely your premiums are to be lower. Not any different than your automobile insurance premiums being lowered because you took a safe driving course. Same type of thing. Your company can perhaps save some significant dollars by following good cybersecurity practices when you go to sign up for cyber insurance. Well, that kind of covers everything that we wanted to get through today. I do appreciate everybody's time. I'll switch over to look at the questions in the chat, see if there is anything in the chat. If there's not, that's fine too. Keep in mind, this information is all available for you uh, at Braxton Grant's website. We'll be posting it by the end of next week. We still have another session to do, and we'll post after that. And keep in mind that cybersecurity should become second nature for you and for all the employees of your company. A lot of it, as I hopefully got across today, is based on human nature and some of the activities that your people do. It's based on company policy, and then there's the technology side, right? If you have questions about the technology side, um, enlist your IT people internally, or if you have an outside provider, that's great. If you need help, please feel free to reach out to us. info@braxtongrant.com is a great way to reach us. And you also see there our website. But please share this training with everybody in your company, and try to make cybersecurity second nature so that you don't fall victim to the cyber threat actors that are out there. Thank you all very much.